Tonight's video has 3 stories about the same fear. Not monsters exactly, not gore, not even the certainty that something supernatural is happening. Just that sick, private moment when you realize somebody has been looking at you for much longer than you understood. The first story started with a man sitting in darkness across the street. My wife and I had been in the rental house for 8 days when I noticed him for the first time. It was just after 11. I had gone into the kitchen for water, looked through the front window without really thinking, and seen somebody sitting on the covered porch of the house directly across from ours. At that distance, he was only a shape, a broad pair of shoulders, a dark jacket, both hands resting on the arms of the chair. He was angled toward our house as if he had been watching TV through the front glass. What made me stop was the porch light. It was off. The whole front of that house was dark except for the weak blue glow of a television flickering somewhere deeper inside. The person on the porch was just a still black outline cut into the dark. I stood there long enough for my wife to ask what I was looking at. When I told her, she came beside me, squinted through the blinds and said, "That's strange. I don't think I've seen anybody go in or out over there." Neither had I, but we had only just moved in and I did not feel like inventing a story around a man sitting on his own porch. So I drank my water and went upstairs. The next night he was there again. Same chair, same darkness, same posture. That was what unsettled me. He was not slouched like somebody scrolling on his phone. He was not smoking. He was not drinking. He was just sitting upright and facing our house. On the third night, I raised a hand through the gap in the blinds. He did not wave back. He did not shift. He did not even seem to notice me. The next morning, I was bringing in a package when the woman from 2 doors down introduced herself. Her name was Kathy, and in the space of 90 seconds, she told me which houses had dogs, which one had college kids, and which trash pickup crews liked to skip the far end of the block. Before she could leave, I pointed across the street and asked who lived there. She looked at the house for a second, too long. Then she said, "Mrs. Kern owns it?" Or owned it, I guess. "She's in assisted living now. Her nephew stops by every couple weeks." I asked if the nephew had moved in. Kathy frowned and said, "Not unless he enjoys sitting in the dark." That night I checked again. The man was back. This time I noticed something else. The chair itself was always in the exact same place by day, but there was never any sign of the man. No car in the drive, no lights on, no movement at the windows, just an empty porch, and once the street got quiet enough, that same shape waiting in it. By the end of the week, my wife had stopped laughing about it. She still said it was probably a relative, probably somebody dealing with a bad home situation, probably 100 normal things, but she had started checking the lock on the front door twice before bed, and she no longer stood in front of the window at night. The first thing that made it feel personal happened on a Thursday. I came home late from work, and before I had even cut the engine, I could see the silhouette across the street. My wife met me at the door and asked if I had been home during lunch. I said no. She held up the small decorative wreath we kept on a hook beside the front step. Someone had taken it down and set it neatly on the doormat. Not stolen, not damaged, just removed and placed where we could not miss it. I walked the property with a flashlight. There were no footprints I could make anything out of. Our side gate was still latched. Nothing else was missing. When I came back to the front walk, the man across the street was still sitting there. I remember having the sudden, stupid urge to yell across the road and ask if he had seen anything. Instead, I went back inside and ordered a doorbell camera. For 2 nights after I installed it, nothing changed. The camera caught cars going by, a loose cat, me taking out the trash, and at 11:07 both nights, the edge of that dark porch across the street with the man just barely visible under it. On the third night, a storm rolled in around midnight and knocked the power out on half the block. The TV glow inside the house across from us vanished. For the first time since I had started looking, the porch was completely black. I stood in the front room watching rain move through the headlights of passing cars, waiting for the outage to make the silhouette disappear. It did not. If anything, he looked sharper without the light behind him. Then a motion light came on in our side yard. I turned so hard I hit the window frame with my elbow. The yard light stayed on for maybe 5 seconds, showing the wet fence boards and the strip of concrete beside the house. Nothing was there. When I looked back across the street, the porch chair was empty. I did not see the figure stand. I did not see him leave the porch. 1 second he was there, and the next, the chair was just a dark rectangle under the rain. My wife called the police that time. 2 officers walked the side yard, checked the gate, circled the garage, and then, because I insisted, went across the street and knocked on the empty house. Nobody answered. One of the officers walked up onto the porch with his flashlight raised. He looked through the front window, checked the side of the house, and came back down. He said the place looked empty. Then he hesitated and added, "But somebody's been out here." On the porch beside the chair, protected from the rain, there was a cigarette still warm enough to smell. They took a report, told us to keep the cameras running, and left. For the next 2 nights, the porch stayed empty. I slept better than I had in a week. My wife started saying maybe whoever it was had gotten scared off by the police, and I let myself believe that because the alternative was admitting that a stranger had chosen our house for reasons I did not understand. On the third night, I woke up at 2:41 for no clear reason. The room was dark except for the charging light on my phone. Then I heard a soft sound downstairs, not loud enough to be a break-in, just the tiniest scrape, like wet rubber on painted wood. I went to the window first. The porch across the street was empty. I do not know why that made my stomach drop the way it did, but it did. I opened the camera app on my phone and checked the live view from the front porch. At first I could not make sense of what I was seeing because the image was too close to anything useful. Just darkness, a blurred patch of wood grain, the corner of the frame. Then the camera adjusted. Somebody was sitting on our porch. Same upright posture, same hands on the arms, same angle toward the front window. He was so close to the door that if I had gone downstairs and opened it without checking, I would have been looking directly into his face. But I could not see his face on the feed. He was wearing a dark hooded rain jacket, and his head was lowered slightly as if he had been listening. I woke my wife, called 911, and kept watching the screen. He did not knock. He did not try the handle. He just sat there. Right before the patrol car turned onto our street, he lifted his head and looked directly into the camera. The feed blurred for half a second while the night vision adjusted, and in that half second he stood up and stepped out of frame. The police searched the yard, the street, and the empty house across from us. They found nothing. But when I reviewed the porch footage in daylight, I noticed something I had missed in the panic. He was already there when the clip started. The motion alert had not activated because he had walked onto our porch slowly enough to stay inside the dead zone near the edge of the lens. The recording began with him already seated outside our front door, facing into our living room exactly the way he had faced our house from across the street. And on the audio, just before I opened the app, there was one quiet sound from outside. Not a knock, not a whisper. The soft creak of somebody shifting their weight in a chair. The second story started with tapping outside a bedroom window. At first I thought it was a branch. That was stupid, because there was no tree anywhere near that side of the apartment. But when you wake up at 2 in the morning to a soft, repetitive sound, your brain reaches for the explanation that lets you go back to sleep. I was renting a ground floor unit behind a dentist's office, the kind of place with old aluminum windows and cheap vertical blinds that never fully closed. My bedroom faced a narrow strip of grass between the building and a chain-link fence. The tapping came at 2:07 on a Tuesday morning. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. I sat up, listened for a minute, and heard nothing else. In the morning, I checked outside. The grass was damp, the fence was wet from overnight mist, and there was nothing near the window that could have touched the glass. The second time it happened, I got up immediately. Same pattern. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. I snapped on the lamp and pulled the blinds apart fast enough that if somebody had been standing there, I thought I would catch them. But the space outside the window was empty. Not just empty. Too empty. The fence line, the grass, the narrow service walk beside the dentist's office, all of it sat there in the light as if it had been arranged for me to study. I remember feeling watched, even though I could not see anyone. When I told my landlord, he said, "Stray cats sometimes jump against screens." I asked how often stray cats tapped in the same rhythm at the same exact time. He smiled like I was trying too hard to be dramatic and told me to let him know if anything got damaged. The third time, I did not turn on the lamp. I stayed still and listened. The tapping came again, softer this time, almost careful. Then something brushed the screen. Not claws, not branches. It sounded like fingertips. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the hum of the small fan on my dresser, and underneath both of those things I could hear what I'm still embarrassed to admit out loud. Breathing from the other side of the glass. I reached for my phone, turned the camera to video and pointed it toward the blinds without moving anything else in the room. The tapping stopped. For maybe 20 seconds, nothing happened. Then one blind vein shifted inward, a fraction of an inch, as if something outside had lifted it to look through. I screamed and threw the phone hard enough to crack the corner of the case. By the time I got the lamp on, the blinds were still. The police came that night. They checked the grass, the fence, the service walk, and the alley behind the dentist's office. One of them found a shoe print in the narrow mud strip beneath my window, but it was too smeared to be useful. The other officer asked if anybody had reason to bother me. At the time, I said no. I meant it. They advised me to keep the curtains shut and buy a camera. My friend Lena came over the next evening because I did not want to be alone. We sat up too late drinking bad boxed wine, making fun of my landlord, and pretending the whole thing was already becoming a story instead of a problem. At 2:07, the tapping started. Lena heard it too. All the joking stopped at once. She reached for the lamp, and I grabbed her wrist because I suddenly did not want whoever was out there to know we were both awake. The tapping came again, then a voice, so low I almost thought I had imagined it. "I know you're awake." Lena turned the lamp on anyway. We both rushed the window together. Nothing, but below the glass right at the bottom edge where the blinds ended, the screen was dented inward. The next day, I bought a cheap motion camera and mounted it on the dresser facing the window. I slept with the lamp off, the camera running, and my car keys in my hand because I had convinced myself I would hit the panic button if I heard anything again. At 2:07, the tapping returned. I did not move. I wanted the camera to catch him clearly. What I did not understand was how close he had to be. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, the clip looked empty for almost the entire minute. Dark room, blinds, soft fan noise, nothing else. Then, in the last 8 seconds, a man's face leaned backward into view from below the edge of the window. He had been standing so close to the glass that the motion trigger had not fully picked him up until he stepped back. He was wearing a dark knit cap. His face was pale in the infrared. His eyes were not scanning the room. They were fixed directly on the bed. I took the footage to the police. This time they were interested. They checked the area more thoroughly, talked to the dentist's office next door, and found out someone had been slipping through the service gate at night because the latch did not catch properly. The officer handling it told me to stay somewhere else for a few days. I stayed with Lena. While I was there, I kept checking the camera alerts from my apartment and seeing nothing. No tapping, no motion, no face. For one full day, I thought maybe the footage had done what the police search had not. Then I went back through the saved clips from the first night I installed the camera. I do not know why I had missed it before. Maybe because I had been searching for the exact moment of the taps. At 1:43 a.m., almost 25 minutes before the tapping started, there was another video. The room was dark. Nothing moved for the first 10 seconds, then a shadow rose slowly into frame from beneath the window, not stepping up, not arriving, just unfolding into view like he had already been crouched there for a long time. He stayed at the glass for 52 seconds without touching it once. He was not trying to get in. He was just watching me sleep. At the end of the clip, he leaned close enough that the camera microphone caught his breath through the screen. Then he whispered something too quiet to make out and lowered himself out of frame. The tapping at 2:07 had not been him showing up. It had been him letting me know he had been there the whole time. I broke that lease and moved out before the week ended. A month later, the detective assigned to my report called and said they had picked up a man outside another apartment complex with gloves, a flashlight, and a folder full of printed stills from surveillance captures. Most of the stills were too dark to identify, but one of them was mine. The frame came from the 143 clip. It showed my dark bedroom from outside the window. And in the lower corner, reflected faintly in the black screen of my television, was the shape of me sleeping in bed. The third story came from the last job I worked before I stopped taking night security contracts. The building was a 6-story insurance office on the edge of downtown, mostly empty after a merger. My shift started at 11 and ended at 7. By midnight, the only sounds left were the elevator relays, the air system, and the occasional buzz from bad fluorescent fixtures on the older floors. There were 43 cameras in the building, but only 12 I watched consistently. The first time I saw her, she was standing in the 4th floor break room at 12:18 a.m. That was strange for 2 reasons. First, there should not have been anybody on the 4th floor. The remaining staff all worked hybrid schedules and nobody stayed late because the place felt depressing even in daylight. Second, she was not doing anything. She was just standing in the center of the room in a light-colored coat, facing the camera, not moving, not looking around, just facing it. I checked the lobby logs. No badge entries after 8:12 p.m. I radioed the loading dock guard in case somebody had slipped in through the service entrance, but he said nobody had come past him. By the time I took the elevator up to 4, the break room was empty. The coffee machine light was on, a chair was slightly out from the table, nothing else. I went back downstairs and told myself I had probably seen a cleaning contractor on an old feed. At 12:26, she appeared on camera 2B by the elevators on the 2nd floor. Same coat, same still posture, same direct angle into the lens. There was no way she could have gone from 4 to 2 without crossing at least one camera in between. And I had watched the monitors the whole time. I pulled playback. On the 4th floor feed, she stood there for 21 seconds. Then the image flickered for one frame. On the next frame, the room was empty. No walking out, no blur of movement, just gone. On the 2nd floor elevator camera, she was simply already there. I started checking timestamps against each other because camera drift in old systems can make weird things look impossible when they are not. The clocks were synchronized. At 12:41, she showed up in the parking garage stairwell. At 12:49, she appeared in a 3rd floor conference room. At 12:56, she was standing at the far end of the 1st floor hallway that led toward the security office. That was when I stopped treating it like a technical problem. I left the office, turned that hallway corner, and found nothing there but buzzing lights and the smell of old carpet. The thing I remember most is how long the hall felt. I knew exactly how long it was. I had walked it hundreds of times, but that night, with the monitor image of her still in my head, it felt stretched. Every closed office door seemed to hold its own piece of darkness. Every glass panel reflected me an instant too late. I went back to the security room sweating through my uniform shirt. Marta, the day supervisor, came in at 6 every morning. When I told her about the woman, she asked if I had checked whether the old annex cameras were still cross-connected to the main system. I asked what that meant. She said before the remodel, there had been a camera mounted high in the corner of the security room itself, pointed down toward the desk and monitor wall. It had been removed years earlier because management did not like the feeling of being watched while they watched everybody else. She laughed a little when she said it. I did not. The second night I saw the woman at 12:14 in the same fourth-floor break room. This time I did not chase her. I stayed at the desk and watched every camera between her and me. At 12:21 she appeared in the second-floor copy room. At 12:28 she was standing in the lobby by the dark reception desk. At 12:34 she showed up outside the security office on the hallway camera. I stared at the live hallway feed. There was nobody there. I looked through the narrow, wired glass window in my door. The hallway outside was empty, but on the monitor, she was standing 5 feet from the door with her hands folded in front of her, staring directly into the lens. I do not know how long I sat there comparing the real hallway to the one on the screen. Long enough that the camera flickered again. When the image steadied, she was gone. I started leaving one monitor permanently locked to the hallway feed after that. I started keeping the security office door shut, and I started noticing that every time she appeared on camera, she was a little nearer to my part of the building. Never running, never transitioning, just occupying less distance. On the fourth night, a storm hit around 1 in the morning. Rain rattled against the loading dock doors. The parking lot lights smeared across the wet glass of the lobby. At 1:09, every monitor on the wall blinked black for maybe half a second. When they came back, every screen showed the same image, not different cameras. One image repeated 12 times. The security desk, my security desk, seen from high in the corner behind me, seen from the angle where the old removed camera used to be. In the repeated image, I was sitting in my chair facing the monitors exactly the way I was in real life. For 1 second, I could not move because I was too busy understanding what I was looking at. Then I noticed the glass. Behind the monitor wall in the repeated image was the black reflection of the dark lobby window. And standing in that reflection directly behind my chair was the woman in the coat. I spun around so fast I caught my knee under the desk. The corner behind me was empty. When I looked back at the monitors, the feeds had changed again. Now every screen showed a different camera, but on each one she was present somewhere in frame. Break room, stairwell, lobby, parking garage, hallway, conference room, always facing the camera, always in the same coat, always looking at me. I radioed the loading dock guard and told him to come inside the office immediately. He did not answer. I called his phone, straight to voicemail. Then the hallway camera outside the security office switched on by itself in the monitor rotation. She was standing there again, closer this time, close enough that I could see her hair was dark and wet against the pale collar of the coat. Close enough that I should have seen her through the wired glass window in the door. I looked at the real hallway, empty back to the monitor. She had raised one hand toward the door handle. I left the building through the rear stairwell and did not stop moving until I reached the street. The loading dock guard called me back at 1:26, sounding half asleep. He had been in his booth the entire time and had never heard me on the radio. Management reviewed the camera system the next afternoon. According to them, no unauthorized woman appeared anywhere in the building that night. There were glitches, yes, some frame jumps, a few signal drops because of the storm, but no woman. Marta showed me the archive footage herself because by then I think she was worried I would sue them if she did not. What the archive showed was worse. From 12:14 until 1:09, while I had been insisting I was watching a woman move through the building, the recorded feeds showed empty rooms and empty hallways. No intruder, no coat, no face at the office door. Just me, visible whenever my own hallway camera or lobby reflections caught the edge of the security room window. And in every one of those reflected glimpses, I was doing something I did not remember doing. I was looking over my shoulder, not once, over and over, as if somebody had been standing just behind my chair the entire shift, and I had been trying not to make it obvious that I knew. I quit 2 days later, before I left for good. Marta printed one still frame from the storm blackout because she thought I should see what the system had actually recorded at 1:09 when all 12 monitors flipped to the same image. It was the security office from the old camera angle. I was at the desk. The room behind me looked empty, but in the black reflection of the lobby glass, just over my right shoulder, there was the shape of a pale face leaning down toward my ear, not looking at the monitors, not looking at the room, looking straight at me.